Welcome to The Other Web. Our guest today is Isabela Sanchez Castañeda, an award-winning podcast strategist and producer for a variety of brands. This episode is dedicated to the meta of podcasting. Am I doing it the right way? And if not, what's the right way to do it? Isabela, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me today, Alex.
Thank you so much for coming. So, you've talked a lot about solo episodes, and obviously I'm interviewing you right now. I've never had a solo episode, so tell me, why do you think those are good?
Solo episodes are so powerful, and most podcasters have not done one. And they are really great because in this interview right now, you're going to ask me some amazing questions, and your audience hopefully is going to say, wow, Isabela's kind of cool. And they're not going to learn a lot about you. They're not going to walk away saying, oh, I learned this about Alex today. Or if they do, it's by accident. Versus with a solo episode, you can intentionally share with your audience something that you want them to take away and associate with you. And because I work with a lot of business owners and a lot of people who are trying to build a brand, they find that they're 100 episodes into their show and saying, no one understands me as a brand. I'm like, yeah, because you've been introducing them to 100 other brands that have nothing to do with yours. And so really solo episodes can be that access point for people to get to know you a lot better.
So that makes sense, especially because as I listen to myself on other people's podcasts where I'm a guest, I understand my message. And when I listen to this podcast, obviously I don't have a message. The message is yours. On the other hand, it seems much easier to deliver my message when somebody else asks me a question. So is the solo episode the best way to do that? Or should I bring in guests who will interview me?
I still think the solo episode is the best. That is a great strategy that you can implement. But the thing that you can do is you've gone on all of these shows. There are questions that have come up more than once. Start with those and then listen back to what you said and kind of compile what the best response you gave was. Put it into a scripting format, which I can go over. I have a really simple format. And then you can answer that question in a succinct way on your show. And then each time you get asked a question and you notice that there's a pattern, it's the same thing. It might spark an idea of, oh, I should turn that into a solo episode. And it doesn't mean you have to abandon all of your guest episodes. You can still really dive into those, but then take advantage of sprinkling in a solo episode here and there.
All right. So you mentioned branding, and I want to dig into that a little bit. How does having a podcast help one with personal branding?
It is, especially with solo episodes, it is you saying, I have something important to say. That is what you're telling the world. And that can actually be really uncomfortable for a lot of people because they're saying, isn't that arrogant? Isn't that really selfish? But no, by putting your face on a cover art or by putting your name on a podcast, you are saying, I am someone worth listening to. And so then we start to associate that with authority, with credibility. And with personal branding, that's what we're trying to really build. That I'm sure 100 different times you've heard know, like, and trust. And with the podcast, you're really getting people to like and trust you. And again, with the solo episodes, you get to say, I want you to associate me with these key things. So I have over 100 solo episodes on my podcast, and I want people to associate me with solo episodes. And so I do them and I talk about them over and over and over so that people can make that connection.
Why is it then that the most famous podcasters, the Joe Rogans of the world, the Chris Williamsons, for the most part, they interview other people? I guess a good example of somebody who does mostly solo is Andrew Huberman, right? So he mostly talks, but he also interviews people from time to time. So he's a good example of a combination strategy. Is it that most people prefer this sort of light-hearted approach where nobody's lecturing me, it's just a couple of people talking? Or is there some other reason that people prefer the Joe Rogan approach to podcasting most of the time?
That is a really great question that I don't think I've dove into before. I think that a lot of the times we're used to that format. We're used to it from radio. We're used to it from other interview style shows. And for the general public, yes, they are going to like a little bit more entertainment. They want to hear what the comedian has to say. They want to hear about a great story. We learn through storytelling. And it's a format that is easy to dive into because you're not putting yourself on the line as much. I'm still pondering exactly why they're the most popular. But I think for the audiences that I'm usually talking to for a business, that's when it's like, okay, do you want the huge popularity? Do you want the Spotify contract? Maybe you do. But I bet you probably want a lead or a client to come in first before that big brand deal. So it goes back to the goals. But now you have my gears turning of like, I got to look into that.
Yeah, as you were describing that, my gears were telling me it's because you're not saying you're the hero, you're saying I'm the magician, and now let's guide the hero together, right?
Yeah.
So in the hero's journey, it's easier to make somebody else the hero, and then you and the audience are sort of together in guiding them through what they're about to say. But if I'm announcing I'm the hero, then I kind of seem a little obnoxious, right?
Oh, that's so good. Because I would challenge you to say, even when you're doing a solo episode, you make the audience still the hero. You make it about them and talking about how they're going to walk away with something. And I think that that's a big mistake. And why people don't want to do solo episodes is because we have heard those that do go, me, 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 me. Let me tell you about me. Let me tell you about the time that I won this award and I got this accolade and all of these things. Versus saying, hey, you're going to walk away with this. You're going to understand this better. And you mentioned Andrew Huberman as an example. I would say Mel Robbins is a great example of someone who does this. She's telling stories about her, but she's always saying, now you, the listener, need to practice this. You, the listener, can try this tactic. You, the listener, have probably been lied to before, and I'm here to clarify. And so she's still putting them in that hero's position. And that's always what you have to come back to for people that want to come back, because most of us are not that interesting for people to just want to listen to stories for the sake of it.
So it's a delicate balance. I've also listened to Alex Hormozi a lot lately, and he mostly does solo stuff. But for the most part, he actually focuses on his past experience. And in one of his talks, he talked about never tell the audience what they should do. Tell them, here's what I've done, what has worked for me. Now, if you want to try, you can try it. Right? So it's a delicate balance where the listener is the hero, but the magician doesn't talk about what the hero must do. The magician just talks from experience.
Yes. And that's so interesting because there is some folks say that it's actually can be generational, where there are some people who are all about like how you can succeed, and the old like sales tactic of you is a replacement for your name, which is your most loved word. And then there are the folks that go how I, and that more Hormozi philosophy of kind of sneaking in the vegetables with the candy. Either way that you do it, as long as you're putting that audience in the forefront, people will kind of get it. Because even though, and I've definitely seen his videos saying that, there's still a lot of Hormozi videos where he's going, you should do this, you should put this in place. All of his books are in you format. And so as long as the core of it is the other person, don't get too hung up on I or you. I would say avoid we. We can be a little confusing for people.
Or at the very least, people might distrust the fact that you're already on we terms, right?
Exactly.
Right. So if we can broaden this a little bit, I assume that people like me who run a business use podcasts mostly as a part in a bigger strategy. So what's been your experience? And I'm going to go into the Hormozi approach of letting you talk about your experience here, right? And helping people build that strategy, and how do podcasts fit into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So podcasting can really work in about 3 different ways for someone's business. One, it can be your absolute top of funnel. And that is a bit more challenging for people who don't already have a big audience somewhere else. But they have the top of funnel. They're trying to bring people in, trying to get brand awareness, trying to get an understanding of, hey, this is what we do. This can work well with interviews where maybe you just put in a 30-second ad spot for your work, or you weave in your work into the episode. And that's number one. Number two, I tend to see more solo episode focused, more middle or bottom of the funnel, where people are talking about directly like, hey, my client got this result. Let me explain to you how they got this result and how you can too. And then the call to action is very direct and it's very, this is my program. That works really well. You can see more of a direct ROI from that. Still not immediate, still a long game, but you can see that work a little bit more quickly. And then the third one, which is sometimes my favorite if you are doing guests, and that is to invite your ideal client onto the show and get them to really experience time with you. And you don't want to do it in an icky way where you turn it into a sales call because everyone can kind of feel that energy. But I have a client who's a physical therapist, and he started his podcast during COVID because he couldn't get into hospitals to see surgeons and to do their kind of like coffee chats that they were all used to. And then kind of when all of the lockdowns and limitations were lifted, the surgeons didn't want to go back to doing coffee chats. So that's how he ran his business, though. He needed referrals. So instead he said, hey, why don't you come to me and I'll interview you for an hour. I'm in Philadelphia and we have a lot of orthopedic surgeons. And so they're all competing for PR and all competing for press. So he invites them in. He gives them an interview. He never talks about what he does, but they see the clinic, they look around and they go, oh, do you have any space for a patient? I actually have someone who's getting their ACL repaired and your facility looks beautiful. And he's like, oh, of course, like I'll follow up with you the next day. He's not making it forceful, but it was just an opportunity to get a conversation with someone who would have otherwise ignored them completely. So I would say those are typically the three ways that I see people really working their strategy. But it has to be combined with other lead generation strategies. And you have to know. The biggest mistake I see is going in with no strategy at all and just saying, oh, if I talk, people will love my brand. And again, none of us are that interesting.
So am I wrong in assuming that all three of those are basically different types of lead magnets? Like you essentially solve the guest's problem in some small way, right? And then hopefully they will notice you're doing something else that might be useful to them, but now that would be paid, right? So the third one's the easiest one. You're solving a PR problem for the surgeon. Surgeon wants PR, right? And then once they figure that they got eyeballs, they notice that you have something else to offer as well, right?
Yes. And then in the other two, it is more about the audience. So with the solo episodes, you're solving it instead of in an ebook or in a course through Thrivecart or something. You're solving it in the episode. I love that second strategy for if you're someone who is a coach who gets a lot of questions, answer the most frequently asked questions and then send people the episode instead of always answering it in the DMs over and over, because it just shows like, oh, this person is willing to stand on this so much they put a whole episode out there. It creates, again, that higher level of authority. And same thing, even with top of the funnel with guests, you want it to be guests that are really relevant to your ideal client.
Yeah, I had a similar thing that I used to do with my previous life where I was pretty much helping people design video cameras and usually by outsourcing things to Asia. And so at some point I was getting the same questions so many times that I went to a conference. I gave a talk on all the different pitfalls of trying to design a video camera using outsourcing, etc. And I would just, every time somebody asked me a question, I would send them a link to the talk that was already public. There was a big audience there, right? It was rated one of the best talks of that particular conference. But I honestly only took it because I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I can answer questions by just sending people to my previous video?
Exactly. And this allows you to do that. I want to challenge you to do that again in this business. And with the podcast, the beauty is because you do want to do a weekly episode, you can answer that question for the specific avatar that's asking. And so I give the example of health coaches, and they get asked like, oh, what are your opinions on meal planning? And what the mistake the health coach will do is they do one episode on meal planning for everybody. The listener starts to tune that out and goes, you don't get me. I can't follow those strategies. So instead I say, do at least 4 episodes on meal planning. And one is going to be meal planning for the busy mom. The other one is going to be meal planning when you have a job that you're working 80 hours a week. Another one is meal planning when you have severe allergies, right? And so even if the ideal client doesn't actually fall into those 3 buckets, because they saw you get so specific about 3 very specific people, they go, okay, they can come up with a custom plan for me. And it just builds that trust with people that you're not going to be another person giving them more generic advice. They see that authority. And you're not really going to be able to do that if you're interviewing someone else at the same time.
And so besides just being able to refer people to your previous episode, are there other ways in which you can repurpose the content you've already created? Maybe create blog posts or snippets or things like that. What's the best practice in this field of how to get the most out of the work you've already done?
Yeah, so blogging, of course. And a lot of people then go, oh, but the transcript is so clunky, all of these things. That's why I highly recommend a strong outline or script beforehand so that you're thinking of repurposing from the very beginning. So repurposing into blogs, when you are scripting out your episode, know ahead of time where you're going to pull clips from, because something that happens a lot is you'll default to acronyms, for example, and then you say, like, a lot of people will know this, but if you say, oh, a P&L, the person needs to get their P&L, blah, 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 and you keep going in the clip. But if you know that you're going to turn that into a social media clip, you will choose to say profit and loss statement in that moment. And then you can actually take those 30 seconds and put them on social and they will be in context. So repurposing through video in that way, but by planning it intentionally beforehand. You mentioned at the top of this that you don't use video for the actual full recording when you publish it, but you have them. You can always take a piece of it. You can put it on YouTube.
Yeah. So I assume when you signed up, you actually gave consent for us to use small clips. So we do use that.
Always, yes.
We just don't post the entire video because honestly, the reason is, it's going to sound stupid, but I saw some research about 1.5 years ago that took a person that was giving a talk or something like that, and they recorded the video of the talk. Then they did just the audio without the video of the talk, and then they created a transcript. They showed these to 3 different groups of people and asked them to rate the intelligence of the speaker. And the audio version won. All right, so the same talk in 3 different modalities, when people just hear it without seeing the speaker, they assume the speaker is more intelligent. I don't know why.
Interesting. I feel like it probably has to do with body language and that connection. You're giving me so much good information for me to go research after. I'm really excited. That and the question before, yeah, it's really thoughtful.
But that's the only reason why we don't post the entire audio, because my entire plan from the beginning was we should do the audio, post the audio, and then I'm going to give it to my marketing people, and they will try to figure out how to slice and dice it and repurpose it because I don't know how to. That's the extent of the planning for our corporate side of this.
All right. I'm like, we can talk after. I'm like, we could develop this a little bit more. And it's not even because you have to put the whole thing on YouTube. It's more just being open to it. Like, what if a clip happens where it's not just 30 seconds, but it's 5 minutes, and you can put the full 5 minutes on YouTube and really optimize the question that it's answering. That can be a really powerful way to do it. And just knowing that ahead of time always makes the final kind of product easier to repurpose.
So I'll ask you, and maybe in this question, I will just be talking about my own deficiency. But one thing that I've noticed with myself is that when you and I talk like this, then I talk pretty naturally. I don't pause myself if I said something incorrect. I just continue because that's what we do in a conversation. If I just do a solo episode and I'm just recording myself, I'm going to pause every 30 seconds and decide, no, I need to redo this. This didn't come out right? I will be very self-conscious and really watching every single word and having this impetus to try to fix it if I did something wrong. Whereas in a conversation, I just assume, okay, the audio editor is going to do their best at the end. Are there any psychological strategies to get over this? Or is this only my problem and nobody else has this?
Everyone has this problem. I still have this problem. And I think it is, I'll ask, do you read a script or are you going off the cuff?
I've tried both ways. If I just read a script live, I've done this with a teleprompter for some videos, not for podcasts, right? But for let's say, videos that we needed to put on the top of some landing page somewhere, right? I've tried those many times in many different ways. And I found that the only way that really works is to practice it 20 times beforehand, the first 10 times with a script reading off a teleprompter, then removing the script and just doing the best I can to say it from memory. Then by the 20th time, it sounds good. But I haven't found a way to make it sound good from the first or second time, whether I tried it with a script, with bullet point, just cliff notes, or just off the cuff. I mean, off the cuff sounds good, but not very eloquent. But at least it sounds natural. But anything with a script sounds robotic the first dozen times.
That is, again, all of that is normal. And I still do recommend the planning, the scripting, at least the outlining. Something that I do, I will read the script a couple times, and I'm not trying to memorize it. I'm just trying to familiarize myself with it. I will read it to myself in a funny voice, whether or even singing it or doing something where it's not your normal cadence, because then you're remembering it better. You're breaking that awkward flow of reading. And so instead of just reading it 20 times straight through, maybe the first time you're doing it in a British accent. Maybe the second time you're doing it singing it. Maybe the third time you are trying to sound like one of the chipmunks. I don't know. That gets you more familiar with it. And then giving yourself permission that when you're actually reading it, you can still change a word here or there. You can change your pace. And it definitely does sound less natural than when you're going off the cuff. I won't deny that at all for people. But really thinking of the end goal of if you really want to serve someone, you're showing actually that you care a lot by having prepared and by having understood that your craft takes time. And most people will respect that a lot more than, oh, it sounded natural but kind of rough, versus it sounded a little like he was reading, but the value is really, really good.
I think this is something that I saw in Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever, where he talked about the reason why most business books are at least 200 pages is not because there's 200 pages in material in them, but to convince the reader that you spend the time to write 200 pages about it and therefore you're worth listening to. And then the message is the only first 10 pages. After that, you don't need to read anymore, right? But you have to make it longer. Otherwise, people assume that work didn't go into it, right?
And with podcasts, I'll say the opposite, though. For solo episodes, I think if you can explain something in 10 minutes and really show like it's quick, it's easy, it's specific in 10 minutes, that shows more preparation than someone that's rambling for 45.
You're going against Andrew Huberman here again, because he mostly covers all the different angles of something in about 3 hours.
But his is really, the thing that I really do appreciate about that is that he's very specific for 3 hours and he's reading the whole time. There are people who will go on for 3 hours, but because they didn't plan. And so they're talking in circles. So if you're going to go into as much depth as Andrew Huberman is in 3 hours, go for it. But if you're just talking for a really long time because you're nervous or because you just didn't plan, that's when we start getting into trouble.
I think I definitely cannot do the Andrew Huberman thing. He has PhD after his name. I have MBA. So I can't do anything for 3 hours. We're not supposed to. But it's interesting. I actually didn't know that he read everything. Like he's reading from a teleprompter the whole time?
I believe so. He's definitely reading from a script. Like he has one on his table, or in a lot of the older videos it showed that. Maybe someone in the comments will tell us otherwise. But no, he has everything very planned because so much of it is technical and because so much of it he wants to get just right.
Right. We're nearing the end of this. So I want to ask now, sort of more free form.
Yeah.
What general tips would you have for people on how to do this better?
I think the first one is posture. Just the easiest way to sound more confident in your podcast, and I feel like both of us are about to like straighten our backs, is to just roll your shoulders back and have more room to breathe. Naturally, you start coming inward and your breath gets really short, and that starts to signal anxiety for your listeners. So just rolling your shoulders back, you sound more confident. I think also being willing to prepare. I follow a lot of John Maxwell's work, and he has in the 16 Laws of Communication, he says, show respect to your audience by preparing, by letting them know that you're willing to put in time before you're in front of them. And so I keep that in mind a lot. And then be willing to look kind of awkward on camera as you learn, as you progress, whether that is solo or guest. Just know that you're going to look awkward sometimes, and that's okay.
So cue the Tucker Carlson look of...
just little awkward moments, and it's okay.
I don't think I can emulate his facial expression, but it doesn't get much more awkward than that. So that's what came to mind. But all right, this is great. And in terms of posture, I'm pedaling on an exercise bike as we're doing it. That's my posture. So I think my posture is whatever I can do and still pedal. But hopefully it's straight enough that I sound somewhat confident.
As long as you don't sound out of breath. I lowered my standing desk, but sometimes if it's the standing desk, I have to keep myself from kind of like shifting side to side.
Yeah, I think that's the problem and why I cannot use that in video. If I use a standing desk, then I move around a lot because I can never stand in one pose, whereas sitting kind of forces me to not move. All right, this has been great. Is there one last message you want to give to our listeners? How do they reach you? How do they do things the right way? How do they improve the world? Whatever you'd like to talk about.
Yeah, I think the number one thing is letting people know that their message is worth sharing. And whether they don't have a podcast at all or whether they want to try solo episodes, there is something there for them to share. And it's time to stop hiding it. And if you want help with not hiding it, you want help with scripting your episodes, anything of the sort, I'm at ISA Media Inc., ISA Media INC. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll share all those links with you. But the best thing you can do is just start putting yourself out there.
Awesome. Isabella, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of The Other Web. Join us next time for more discussions on media, podcasting, or anything that might interest us.